Even before it was passed into law on January 8, 2002, No Child Left Behind has stirred a frenzy of debate among politicians and education experts. But we wanted to get insights from the people who are affected the most by the law: teachers, parents, and most importantly, the students.
Our first guest is Miss Williams, a concerned parent from a local high school who is in support of No Child Left Behind.
So tell me, how did you feel about the American education system prior to No Child Left Behind?
I hated it. Quite frankly, I feel as if the American education system let too many unqualified teachers into the classroom. I had a son who was in the high school system prior to that, and all he would do is come home and complain about how his teachers knew nothing about the subject they were teaching. I feel that prior to No Child Left Behind, schools were not being held accountable for the teachers they were putting in classrooms, and ultimately it's the students who suffer.
Okay, so how do you feel now?
I believe that No Child Left Behind is a good start in keeping schools accountable for the teachers that they're placing in the classrooms, as well as the student performance. I feel that with the requirement for teachers to be proficient in their field, students are getting the best educators that are available. I also feel that with the Title I, the schools are being rewarded when they're performing well, which is what is desperately needed, especially in schools that are in lower income areas. If they are doing well, then they get rewarded with that. If they are not doing well, within 2 years, they may be shut down, or students may be relocated to higher performing schools. I think that's the best way to kind of inspire the schools to do well.
So holding schools accountable is important to you?
It is very important to me, yes. I believe that when schools are held accountable, they will step up to the plate to give the students what they really need in their education.
And do you feel that the standards of accountability are fair?
Absolutely. I think that giving schools 2 years if they're performing below the standards, that's plenty of time to raise their scores. If the students are really concerned with their education, they will be performing well. They will see, well, maybe I need to graduate. You know, I need a high school diploma to get a decent paying job. If we can show the students how important it is for them to graduate, then they'll graduate. The schools need to take on the responsibility, and they need to do that. And unless somebody keeps them accountable, they aren't going to do that.
Fair enough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next guest this evening is Mr. Too Cool for School, a student from a local high school.
So tell me, Mr. School, did you have an opinion about the American education system prior to No Child Left Behind?
Read from the script. Read the answers.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, prior to No Child Left Behind Act in 2002, former President Bill Clinton established the Improving America's School Act, or IASA, in 1994, which increased school funding to cover additional programs for disadvantaged students in grades 3 through 5, 6 through 9, and 10 through 12. In 1998, only 60% of 4th graders performed at or above the basic level, and only 30% of 8th graders and 40% of the nation's 12th graders scored at or above the proficient or average level, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. Based on these studies, I felt that some form of change was needed in order to improve America's educational system.
That's a very intelligent opinion. So tell me, how do you feel now?
Well, I think that No Child Left Behind is a wonderful program that will benefit economically disadvantaged students, where the schools will be assisted by federal aid under Title I. The Act provides extra funding for school districts with high concentrations of poor students, and urban areas have seen dramatic increases in Title I aid. High poverty, rural areas have also seen significant gains.
Okay. So do you like the idea of holding schools accountable for student performance?
I truly do, because our children need to be as well prepared as possible, and it is the responsibility of the schools to produce intelligent and knowledgeable individuals into society. Through No Child Left Behind, statewide testing will motivate teachers and students to remain focused on improving educational standards as well as individual growth in terms of intelligence.
Okay. Well, do you feel that the standards of accountability are fair?
The standards of accountability are more than fair. Schools should always maintain the idea that all students should strive for his or her best. If that means periodic testing, then I am all for it. Anything that will improve educational standards in our country will increase the number of successful students, which will lead to more high school graduates and more successful careers.
Okay. Well, if you could make any changes to No Child Left Behind, what would you do?
I would create stricter guidelines, changing the stipulation where if a school fails to make adequate progress for 2 years in a row, the school will receive technical assistance from the district. I would change this rule to 1 year, allowing the teachers to stay on task with the required material. Also, No Child Left Behind provides students with the option that if their schools fail to reach adequate progress for 2 years, the student has the option to transfer to another public school. I think that if a school is failing the No Child Left Behind regulations, students should automatically transfer out to a passing school with higher standards. Who wants his or her child attending a failing school?
Okay.
When do I get paid?
What? Don't say that. Cut.
Our final guest is Ms. Hewlett, an English teacher from a local high school who wishes to see reform in the NCLB laws.
So tell me, Ms. Hewlett, how did you feel about the American education system prior to No Child Left Behind?
I felt that there were quite a few teachers who were unqualified entering into the education system. Teachers who had emergency credentials or substitutes who weren't fully qualified were being placed into classrooms in subjects often that they had no knowledge in. And the people who suffer are the students. They're having teachers who don't know what they're talking about. They may have a math teacher who majored in English, an English teacher who majored in science. If the schools aren't being held accountable for what teachers they're putting in the classrooms, the students are going to end up being confused. They aren't going to have teachers who know what they're doing, and then the schools aren't keeping them accountable. I would say that before No Child Left Behind, the education system was failing the students. We saw high dropout rates, students are unmotivated to do well in school, and generally there's very little interest in education.
So how do you feel about the system now?
I think a lot of people assume that all teachers are against No Child Left Behind, and that's not the case. What the students want is to see reform in the laws. One of the things that I think that No Child Left Behind is doing well is keeping schools accountable. If the schools are kept accountable, then we're going to see teachers with more credentials entering into the program. They're going to use their knowledge and skills and pass that on to the students. So I feel that, in theory, No Child Left Behind is a very good law that just needs a little bit of tweaking.
So holding schools accountable is an important step in student performance?
I think it is. If schools aren't held accountable, then students are going to be allowed to do whatever they want. The standardized test scores are going to drop. But as a teacher, I feel often that I have to teach to a test. I don't get to cover as much as I want to in class because I'm given what I need to teach and only a certain amount of time to do it. The testing it kind of gets in the way of real learning, I believe.
So do you feel that the standards of accountability are unfair, maybe?
I do feel that they're unfair. I think that they're expecting us to have too much change in too little time. You're giving us 2 years for schools that are not doing well to change their act. I don't feel that's enough time, especially when we have more students and less qualified teachers.
Okay, so if you could make any changes to No Child Left Behind, what would you do?
Well, if I can, I'd like to read an example that I found in U.S. News No Child Left Behind's issue. The first 5 years of No Child Left Behind offer plenty of evidence of its reach and suggest 5 areas in which a revised law could offer improvements. Though the law is quick to divide schools into those that perform well and those that don't, there appear to be few consequences for the latter. Its regimen of standard tests seem particularly inappropriate for students who are learning English as a second language and the schools that enroll them. Teachers are worried that their income will be tied to how the students score on the tests. Schools have little incentive to teach gifted students to meet their potential. And the academic measurements for this federal law vary widely from state to state. There are ways each of these concerns could be addressed. Whether the political will exists to make such changes happen is debatable. I believe that changes do need to be made, and the best way to do that is to get the teachers involved. If the teachers are seeing the need for reform, they will participate. If they can work with the politicians to reform these laws, then we'll see a huge increase in interest in developing educational laws that benefit students. I believe, as an English teacher, one of the major problems is students who have difficulties learning English as a second language. We need to be given more resources to identify those students with troubles learning. We need to be able to identify those problems and then give them the education, give them the tools and the resources they need to be able to overcome those difficulties. And that's just not happening. For example, schools that do not perform well enough don't get the funding. Oftentimes the schools that aren't performing well enough are the ones that need the funding most. They need to reevaluate who gets the funding and why.
Okay, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.